Hello, all you dreamers, optimists, and junior Tomorrownauts. Welcome back to the Tomorrowland Times podcast, the unofficial home for fans of Disney's 2015 Tomorrowland movie, its prequel novel Before Tomorrowland, and the alternate reality game that introduced us to its fictional universe all the way back in 2013, The Optimist. I'm Nick.
And I'm Hastin, and today we've got just an amazing treat for you. We've got a bonus follow-up episode to our Before Tomorrowland book club with some really special guests.
That's right, Hastin. Not so limited after all, it turns out. Today is the 10th anniversary of the original theatrical release of Tomorrowland back on May 22nd, 2015, and we're so lucky to have the authors of its prequel novel here with us for a special reverie.
But before we dive in, shouldn't we check that mailbag first?
Great idea, Hastin. I'll just whip out my MFD here. Beep, boop, beep, 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 boop. Oh, look at that. It's a message from our old buddy, Max Fagan. Max writes, in the last episode, you asked to identify the landmass that the rocket was diving towards right before punching through the portal to Tomorrowland. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I can confirm it is Western Europe, exactly as expected if they were going right back to Paris, where they launched from. Here's a side-by-side comparison of a screenshot with a rendering from Space Engine. Thanks for continuing the podcast. Wow.
Thank you so much, Max. I mean, you think about it, that makes perfect sense. They want to build this highlight of the city right at Paris, where it all started on the face of our reality and our Earth, right there where the Eiffel Tower is. So it makes perfect sense.
Brilliant. Thank you, Max. I really appreciate it. I knew we could count on Max. Thank you, Max. And now, without any further ado, please welcome to the show co-author and illustrator of Before Tomorrowland, Jonathan Case, alongside his co-author, the screenwriter and executive producer of the Tomorrowland movie, Jeff Jensen. Yay! Jeff, Jonathan, welcome to the Before Tomorrowland book club, and most importantly, please allow us to be the first to wish you a happy 10th Tomorrowversary. It's the Tomorrowversary, a decade of Tomorrowland this year.
Wow. Oh, thank you. I had no idea, actually. I wasn't tracking it that closely. That's amazing.
You're telling me Disney doesn't send you an email every year about this?
The only reminder that Disney sends me of Tomorrowland's existence is a quarterly royalty check for about 25 cents.
That's incredible. And I am very curious to hear what happens to that now that, I mean, look, the big thing about the Tomorrowland fandom is we had like a generation come up that didn't have it available to them on Disney Plus because for almost a decade it wasn't on Disney Plus, but now it is. So I'm curious to see how we'll check back when it's the 20th anniversary. We're going to ask you about that royalty check again.
There we
Absolutely.
See how Disney Plus has affected that. Jeff, last time we talked about this book, you very kindly talked to us about the very early days of the world building for the movie that would lead into what became this book. But I want to use this anniversary conversation as an opportunity to really get into the weeds and the nitty gritty as far as you guys are able to recall. Can you paint us a picture of those early days, outlining the story, and at what point in that early development did your co-author enter the picture?
Well, this is quite the story, and I'll start, and then there might be a place for me to leave off, and then Jonathan to come in and pick it up and even correct. As we probably talked about before, and might be established with the 7 people that are probably part of your Before Tomorrowland book club, that when Damon and I were working on the movie and we are working on the story, and we settled on the idea that this Tomorrowland place was built by a secret society that we were calling Plus Ultra, and had been engaged in various projects and sub-projects leading up to the grand project of Tomorrowland for quite some time. And that the membership of Plus Ultra included some of the most famous people and not so famous people in all of the world, and science and engineering and arts, etc. We just started building a timeline. We started building a timeline and a backstory mythology for Plus Ultra. And as we built out this backstory of Plus Ultra, there were specific moments in the history where we just very immediately saw, oh, this would be we could easily see what the story was or what the issues were at this point in plus ultra history. And one area in particular that we thought was really fertile ground was circa late 30s around the World's Fair, which, like in New York, that had as its big theme as futurism and kind of the leading lights of plus ultra, most notably Nikola Tesla, would be very much involved, and that we imagined that 1930s, early 40s New York City would be a hotbed of like espionage activity involving Nazis and the Soviets kind of wanting to know what's going on with this secret society, and even the Americans kind of wanting to know like what's going on with this secret society. And very immediately, like a story started kind of like forming, you know. And I remember vividly having a meeting with Brad after he came aboard on the movie, and we were talking about some of this backstory, and we talked about this part of plus ultra history in particular. And he was like, oh, like, well, that would be a good movie. And so I kind of took that as like, okay, like there's there in terms of that story. And then I was asked, part of my duties on Tomorrowland was to liaise with different parts of the Disney organization and talk about how we can merchandise or cooperate with them and do story through various other parts of Disney. And I took a meeting over at Disney Publishing, and we talked about the backstory that we had developed. I talked about this story in particular. The editors there said, "Oh, that sounds like a really great idea for some storytelling." I ran this past Damon and Brad. They gave their blessing and had some ideas on what that story can be. And then I was off and running. And maybe I want to stop there for a second and now bring in Jonathan and ask, because I'm actually a little fuzzy now, Jonathan. What were the circumstances by which I reached out to you and asked you, like, was Amy already a factor in this, or did that come a little bit later?
Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember if Amy was a factor. So as I recall, Jeff, you and I were sitting in a park in Portland and we were chatting about the different projects that we had going on. And at the time, I had this weird synchronicity where I was working on a project, a comics project of my own that I was writing and drawing called The New Deal, and it was set in like early 30s New York City. It was at that point, I don't know if that came first or if you had already kind of had me in mind to pitch the project to me just to do illustrations, because that was the beginning of it. You needed an illustrator, and we had worked together on a graphic novel previously. And so yeah, that's what I remember about it, but I don't remember if
Yes.
Amy's situation was in full force yet.
That is correct. Yes, I'm a big fan of Jonathan's work in general, and not just because like our collaboration and his work on the graphic novel Green River Killer was just so amazing and valuable and important to me and dear to me. But like I love the New Deal as well. One of the very first things that Damon and I ever talked about in terms of fun little like ancillary media to do with Tomorrowland was creating some kind of comic book. And we kind of imagined that like Plus Ultra in the 60s would have like actually partnered with some comic book artists to kind of like create a comic that teased at the secrets of Plus Ultra and what they were working on for the purpose of getting comics out there to find dreamers and to find people who might be kind of like fellow travelers in this work. And we fell in love with the idea of like creating a comic book that kind of told the backstory of Plus Ultra, and then like printing like 100 of them and then like sneaking them into comic book stores all across the country in the back issues section, and just seeing if someone would find them and make it look like it was a comic that was made like in the 60s, and like, you know, either polybag it or bag it or not, and then like put it in like, some version, and then somehow get word out there in the fan base, um, that there was treasure out there to be found. Like that was an initial catalyst. But I would just say that from the get go, the idea of comic books was part of our conversation. And then when I was talking to Jonathan about this and we were looking for, not only illustrations, Jonathan, but you actually drew a little mini comic that is part of Tomorrowland. And I just thought that, like, not just because I just love working with you, but I just thought aesthetically would be perfect for it. And luckily enough, Jonathan was very game. That's sort of the beginning of our collaboration on the book. Like, I was gonna write a book, like, I'd asked Jonathan to help in these specific ways. I wanted to tell him more about it too. While we were working on this, my wife, Amy, at the time, she had brain cancer, and she was really struggling in a bad way, and, she ultimately, she passed away in the summer of 2014. We were still like very early days in actually writing, and to be honest with you, I was very behind on the writing because of the health crisis in the home, and I couldn't focus, and I wanted my attention elsewhere. And so there came a point for Jonathan and I where we had to have a conversation, and the conversation was whether we let the project go or we try to find a way to keep it alive. Disney had basically signaled to us whatever we decided to do, they were okay with. They understood. I'm pretty sure it was you, Jonathan, who pitched the idea of, well, I took the reins of writing it. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was the sort of idea that was there was some youthful enthusiasm there. There was also a desire to work on a property with my heroes. Brad Bird. I'd always loved his stuff, and I enjoyed very much working with you on Green River Killer. And I just thought it was a cool project. But the main thing was, at the time, we were aware of Amy's diagnosis and the prognosis, and you had kind of shifted some conceptual ideas around with the book, and it was going to
Yeah.
be very much a book for your kids. So you were at least far enough along that you had this sort of in mind, that you wanted to make sort of a monument or something, a way of remembering your wife and sort of bringing that story into this work. And I thought that that was compelling, and it was one reason to not just let go of it. And so through that combination of ideas, yeah, I reached out to Jeff and said, well, I do write. I've written these other books. I haven't written prose, but if you were to be able to provide detailed outline to me, I could draft the copy, and then you could come back and edit it and make it what it needs to be. The main barrier for us was, or potential barrier was, that we only had just months left before we had to deliver it.
Yes.
It was like I
Yeah.
needed to like get started and write an entire first draft in like a month and a half or 2 months. And so we did that, and then the real fun began.
So in that period where, Jonathan, you had brought in to get that first draft together, we've been able to have little peaks of that, which is to say, if your first draft was around August 2014, and then that very different second draft was later in October, well, something that happened right around then was New York Comic Con. And this was handed out, this little pamphlet that has an excerpt of a few chapters. Now, I believe, because the text in here does not necessarily match that second draft, I think we've got either an in-between draft or little glimpses of that first draft. So I would love to hear, to your recollection, how did that first draft differ and develop into what we finally got?
Well, Jeff might be able to speak to how it differed more accurately than I could, but I think it was basically just a very streamlined, pared down version of what it later became, because time limitations and just writing in a very kind of choppy, efficient, Hemingway-esque kind of voice probably using, and he looked at way too many times. I remember that being something that Jeff was like, they don't need to look at everything. And then he looked, and then he, yeah. So yeah, just it was short. Disney was very affirming, I remember, of the draft when it was delivered. The art was already pretty much all done. I think that was another factor in, hey, why don't we try to make this work, because we had already completed all the artwork elements, or I had illustrated everything. Maybe even the backup comic book issue at that point. Maybe you can speak a little bit to that process of like what it was initially like to get a few bits and pieces and to feel like we're on a roll. And then that was probably the point at which, like, once I turned in something that Disney could see, like, okay, you at that point were probably looking at it and thinking like, okay, this is nice to have, but now the real work begins. And as well you should have. And I think that was that might have been July, actually, when we've submitted that very first draft.
I've been giggling here, kind of shaking my head a little bit here because I think Jonathan knows what's coming here, which is like my memory of that summer, spring leading into summer. And let me just back up a real second, 1 second. Like when Jonathan agreed to take on the work of writing this thing under duress. I mean, we had a deadline and I was behind. And yeah, like the, I did, I did like want to see it reach fruition. So when Jonathan offered, hey, like I can do this, I'm willing to take this on. It'll be hard, uh, given the time crunch and all of that, and the unconventional way that we're essentially now collaborating. I want to do this. I want to do this for you. I want to do it for the project. I want to see this story made. I mean, that just moved me tremendously. And I'm so grateful that he would want to take on that kind of labor, which was really hard. So I think I remember having a conversation with you about this and working it out while I was parked in my car, pulled off to the side of the road on the way to a meeting with my pastor to talk about issues related to Amy's decline and just being very moved by our conversation. And then I just don't have any memory of what happens with before Tomorrowland from handing it off to some point in the fall where I have recollection now of engaging the text that Jonathan had heroically and artfully written. That little New York Comic Con like excerpt, like you're blowing my mind here. I completely forgot that existed, and I can't even account for its contents. Like I just don't. I don't like what like we did that really. Oh, that sounds like a smart piece of marketing. Like good on us. Like
Yeah.
so okay. So I completely forgot about that.
Me too, actually. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I had just had my wife had just had our second baby. Um, we had a son, Otis, who incidentally, I don't want to derail this further with another story of grief, but we lost him 2 years later, and so that was one of the
Oh man.
strange ways of connecting with Jeff and having this kind of like circling around creativity and loss and family. And but at that point he was a happy, healthy baby, very demanding. I remember like writing script, like drafting script on my desk while I simultaneously held him with one hand against my desk, like just trying to juggle baby and script. And we had just moved into a new house, and it was like everything was crazy and chaotic, and to say nothing about like how crazy and chaotic it was for Jeff. So it was, yeah, it was very much a wild time. My recollection of like getting started on drafting copy was like Jeff in maybe May, like late May, was sending me, just a few hundred words, maybe a
Yes.
couple thousand words of chapter outlines. And I
Yes.
would just take that and build a full chapter out of it. I might make some of my own additions, but more or less I was sticking to what he set down as a guideline. And so that was the first draft, getting that complete. Turned it into Disney. Disney was like, looks great. What do you guys want to do? We have a deadline coming up. The next deadline, I want to say, for second draft was another month and a half or something. So yeah, that August draft, the second draft. So if I'm turning it in late July or like early July, it was end of August for the second draft. So at that point, he and I were working back and forth on copy. So he would come in and make edits and additions, and then I would go back through and say like, okay, that looks great. This broke over here. Let's fix this. But it was all still sort of taking shape. But it was also kind of the beginning of the challenge of working together as co-authors when, yes, I've got new baby, Jeff has declining wife, and forgive me that I don't remember, Jeff, what point did Amy pass?
The middle of June. So June 19. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, gosh.
So June 19, and then and then basically by the middle of July, I ended up me and the kids ended up Jonathan, this is what I kind of remember in terms of that summer for me, is that I'm sure that we were in contact, but from basically the 3rd or 4th week of July through almost the entirety of August, I was up in Seattle, up at home with my parents and stuff like that. And then when we came back at the end of August, the kids went to school, and then like that's when I said, okay, I'm ready to work again. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to really engage before Tomorrowland. And then yes, so from my recollection, thus begins at this point this so probably in a different and better world, this is kind of what should have happened, I think. And Jonathan may have a different opinion on this, but I think that given what we all know, what we know now in retrospect, what really needed to happen was I needed to honor honor the agreement and the work that we had set in motion, which is that Jonathan had authored this work, and not that I couldn't give notes or comment, but really the best way I could have served the project best is working in a kind of consulting editor position with Disney and giving Jonathan notes on just best ways to fine tune it in the time that we had available so that we can leave even more time for things like copy editing and proofing and stuff like that. I did not do that. I did not do that. Instead, coming hot out of that summer, that very hard and summer, I really kind of wanted to re-engage life. I wanted to re-engage work, and so I was like, I I talked myself into believing that I really needed to re-engage before Tomorrowland and honor my commitments to Brad and Damon and all of that. And this is all to say that what ended up happening with Jonathan and I, without going into the blow by blow about it, not because I don't want to share that, but just because it's all so fuzzy in my brain. But I didn't edit Jonathan's work. I kind of like over engaged and rewrote things that really didn't need to be rewritten and stuff like that, and creating this dynamic between Jonathan and I where I'm taking his work and rewriting it and sending it back to Jonathan. And he's like, wait, what? And also, I'm not sure that this is what's best for the project. Like in my sort of world building mythology mode of like, I want to get as much of my Tomorrowland stuff in here. Like I wanted to put just more and more and more in, but I think it was coming at a cost of the artfulness of the prose and the read. and it was putting us behind, too. Like, that deadline that we kept on getting pushed as I kind of wanted to engage more and more. So I wanted to. Well, the irony is that I wanted to, I wanted to contribute to a good thing, but the way that I was engaging in the time frame that we had, I don't think was serving the project well. And so our collaboration was fraught that way. And Jonathan, I just really appreciated Jonathan, just being very candid with me of saying, I'm, I, I'm not sure this is the best way to go, buddy. And, and I'm like, "La, la, la, I can't hear you, Jonathan." Jonathan and I had a really good conversation recently in which we processed about this. And, and for me, like, coming out of that summer, and I don't mind confessing this, is just coming out of that summer, having dealt with loss and grief and still very much in that process, I was desperate for something to control and get some kind of control back and exert myself. Unfortunately for Jonathan and for the beautiful thing that is Tomorrowland, I chose this project to be the battlefield and proxy war by which I was going to regain my agency over over my life and all of that. And I just don't think it served the project very well.
To be fair to, I think, something that you alluded to, you also had insight into the tone of Tomorrowland the movie and the content of Tomorrowland the movie in a way that I simply did not as a pure
Sure.
outsider. And so there, I think,
Yes.
very
Sure.
justifiable aspect of what you were intending, which was you wanted to make sure that the things coalesced, and so that the tone would be sort of a piece, maybe more than it was because I was an outsider, and
Sure.
so introducing some aspects of that, you could have done that on an editorial basis, but I think, just to speak about your process and the hell that that must have been to go through with Amy, um, it wasn't entirely just escapism. I think it was also you're trying to serve the project in the way that seemed best to you.
Sure.
And as the person who was initiating all of the gears, that made sense. It just became stressful when we ran up to deadline, and simply
Right.
we just didn't have enough time to sort of bring things back into shape in the way that ideally they should have been.
I'm suddenly remembering now that by the fall of now 2014, I, I don't know what I had started seeing cuts of the movie, and I started catching wind as I'm sort of re-engaging Tomorrowland after that summer. I am catching wind of some other proposed editing changes that are happening to the movie that is causing me to be a little concerned that there were now things going to be cut out of the movie that might, yes. Okay, I'll tell you guys a funny story. One of the things that happened that summer before I disappeared up to Seattle is that there was this very important screening of the film up at Lucasfilm. Um, I went up there, Damon went up there, Disney execs went up there. At the time, Brad was experimenting with a new cut of the movie, very radically different version of the movie that was out there that we ultimately released. The first half of the movie was a cross-cut narrative between Casey in the present and Frank in the past. It was going back and forth between the two of them until the point where Casey meets grown-up Frank on his farm, and then those two narratives suddenly converge, and we were testing that version of the film at this screening, and it was a really cool experience. Um, I was overwhelmed by the sense of oh, this is a really creative way to tell the story, but it was hampered and subverted by the fact that it just wasn't written that way or shot that way. And moreover, Francis Ford Coppola was there.
No
And
kidding.
yeah,
Wow.
and so Francis Ford Coppola was there, and the note that he gave Brad and Damon that got back to me was that he loved the tone, he loved the scene work, and this is the note he gave. It stuck with me, and I think it went right into the book, which is ultimately, though, I just felt like I didn't have enough contextual understanding of the world to really appreciate the very cool scenes in the movie or know what was at stake. And moreover, aftermath of that screening, it became very clear that one, we were never going to go out with that cut, and 2 is it needed to be streamlined into a more linear narrative, and it had to be way shorter, which would mean that even more things were gonna get cut, including the thing that, like, I love to pieces, a sequence in which young Frank at the World's Fair goes underneath the It's a Small World ride and watches a film about the origins of Plus Ultra, this beautiful piece of animation that Brad had the guys at Pixar work on and aired as a cartoon before some theatrical versions of the movie. But ultimately, that was going to get cut. So, with Francis Ford Coppola's like voice in my head, and 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 and
Amazing.
and
Yeah.
and knowing that, not that I heard Francis Ford Coppola's voice, but what I was told he had said,
Yeah.
um, and who am I to quibble with the director of Megalopolis? I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
I assume this is the screening at which Francis asked Brad if he had any unused concept art he could literally just put into his movie because
Yeah.
Megalopolis, I don't know why Brad is thanked in the credits of Megalopolis, but my first thought was some of those shots of the city,
They feel like Tomorrowland. Yeah.
they look like Tomorrowland.
And I will interject that the boom, like the mic boom, like dropping in that one shot in Megalopolis, is sort of on brand with Before Tomorrowland as well, in its own way.
There we go. There we go. Yeah. So, but yeah, just to go back to Jonathan's point, I think I was rolling into that fall knowing what wasn't going to be in the film anymore and worried and then suddenly saw Before Tomorrowland as a fix. In my mind, it's like, oh yes, like everyone in the world will read the prequel book before seeing the movie. That is a thing that will happen. And but like if we could get a lot of context for the mythology and the world there, the book ends up becoming a way to explain things that maybe people might not be connecting with or getting from the movie. So yes, like that was like an animating concern on my part entering into the fall and writing and adding as much as I did.
Just kind of a perfect storm of contributing factors and influences and people to please, and I mean it was it's an octopus for sure.
Yeah.
Throughout that process, before we move into the nitty gritty, because I do want to call out some specific things to see if they jog any memories for you guys. But after you've shared this very personal story, I just want to let you guys know from the outside, as people who are hearing this story for the first time and had no perception of any of the process that went into the writing of this book, Haston and I have been revisiting it over the last 7 episodes, really digging in deep into the weeds of this story. And we have appreciated it more now than we even did back when it came out because all the things you're describing, the movie is in our sights. We're trying to figure out how the book connects with the movie, and we were kind of blinded by the lore of it all. And being able to revisit it now, none of this back and forth is evident at all in the book. And the two of us have really been able to connect with the story that you've done on a much more personal level. And quite frankly, I do think it's more prescient now than it was even at the time. And it kind of was exactly the story Haston and I needed to be diving into in 2025.
Oh, cool. Well, I mean, that's wonderful to hear. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, just, and I know we're all artistic folks in this in this conversation, but you know, we're so close to our work. I mean, like, you know, all Jonathan and I probably want to talk about is like the boom mics dropping into frame. Like that's all I think about, you know, like and like I also have a weird relationship to my work, and I don't know if you guys can relate to this. I I I I love having conversations with people like this, with you guys, and answering all curiosities about it without trying to defend the work or anything like that. I just like, you know, like what questions you have so that you can inform your own judgments. But in terms of actually going back and rereading my own work, I don't know about you, Jonathan, but I hate doing that. It's like it inevitably quickly leads to, oh, I could have written that better, or oh, how did that typo get in there, or that kind of thing.
The way in which your personal lives and the circumstances of that were informing, obviously, Clara's journey, informed by what you were already dealing with, Jeff, in your life. I kind of, Jonathan, I want to hear from you a little because as we were really digging into the text, I started because we sort of knew the headlines of how what Jeff was going through was influencing the story. I want to hear. I feel like there are some details in here where I said to myself, this must be from Jonathan's life as an artist at conventions specifically. Like, I want to ask you about the details of that portfolio review that Clara has. I don't know if that's bringing back anything, but am I completely wrong? Did Jeff write all that stuff and he was just figuring it out? Or what did you see of yourself that you were being able to inject into the different corners of the story?
Man, there's only a few things that I can really conjure from my memory where I know that I wrote like a whole chapter or a whole section of something and I could tell you like what I was thinking about as I was doing it and it's probably still there in the book in some form. I don't actually remember the details of that scene, but now that you're mentioning it, I certainly had experience with editors and portfolio reviews and that sort of thing. So yes, that would have very much been probably a me moment. But Jeff was also adding in a lot of the convention specific details because he's like me a big nerd and he's been to those things and seen the fandom and the way that fandom can run amok and that so that end of things was very much still Jeff. Stuff that I remember writing, the scene where Henry's dad gets blasted in the accident on the airfield. I remember writing pretty much that whole chapter, um, and just conjuring like memories of being in Southern California, interacting with like my
Mm,
grandfather could work on anything
mm,
at a farm, and he had relatives, older folks who just seemed to come like out of the earth there, just like they were just such a part of that world and they had names like Doob and they just uh, machine shop guys,
Yeah.
and so I remember that one being one that i I kind of put a lot of maybe my own thoughts into. And then there was a scene, I don't actually know if this made it into the book in the form I wrote it or not, but baddie number one and number two have their kind of final confrontation, and Duquesne, the spy, is in that place with his like contingent of ladies, um, spy ladies, and so I wrote that chapter and had a lot of fun with that one as well. I remember.
Yeah, let's let that be our transition into getting into the weeds a little bit. We spent 7 episodes comparing the various drafts. We have the advanced reader copy, we have the preview pamphlet, we have the final version of the book. And so we've really enjoyed, I would basically just do little excerpt readings of the sections where there was something different. So I just want to go through some of those changes. We saw some residual mentions to Worldcon not being called Worldcon and Worldcon being called NYCon or Nikon. And I don't know if there was a version where you guys were floating. Maybe we need to fictionalize this. What went into that? If you have any memory of that.
I don't have a vivid recall, but that sounds like a category of flaw that got into the book based on 2 things, like just, yeah, the constant rewriting combined with competing sources of research combined with me just making sloppy errors. But what I want to say is that that convention in particular that you're talking about in the book, that sequence, I mean, part of my world building for the movie and plus ultra was sort of charting both the history of world's fairs, but also like science fiction conventions. And this convention in particular that coincided in New York and coincided with the World's Fair was actually a rather monumental one in the nascent history of science fiction culture. And there was like all of these like really juicy philosophical debates about like that was happening within the sci-fi community of what science fiction should be and what its goals should be as a genre and what is good sci-fi and bad sci-fi. And I love trying to like get all of that stuff into the book. But yeah, I believe that like in the lore of that convention, it has gone alternately by a couple different names. I am sure that if our preference would have been to be consistent in one single word to describe the convention, but in my rewriting, I probably lost track of that and just got the words confused.
And let me alleviate your fears, though. The final version of the book does not have that mention in it. This was between drafts. The final edit has no evidence of that. I was just saying, as part of the evolution, I was curious if it was like the remnant of some kind of fictionalized thing. But competing research makes perfect sense as
Yeah.
well. And there are some great, Clara's little speech to try and bring the two sides of the fanboys together. There are some longer versions of that have what I must imagine are one of the two of you's version of how when we talked to Damon about Nix's final speech in the movie, he said, "I transcribed what Brad has clearly done at dinner parties for for most of his life," and I just assume that sometimes, okay, a character can kind of voice some of my frustrations with a real world thing, and it was a real treat to be able to dig in and see some of those just little moments of, well, if we keep fighting like this, there'll be no fans left to have a convention for. And I'm like, yeah, I've had that thought too. I know exactly what that feeling is. Okay. So we have much bigger, more interesting questions, but since we're in the weeds, so in this little preview pamphlet, which is our only glimpse we have into the first draft, there's also a character mentioned who is in no other draft. And so I'd like to see if this name calls up anything. In the final version of the book, Amelia gets a call from one of the Faustus units informing her of something that's happening. In the preview text, she gets a call from a Plus Ultra agent named Scolari, who I assume is not Peter Scolari, because Peter Scolari wasn't born at this time. So I'm wondering if the name Agent Scolari brings back any memories of that very, very, very first draft of the book.
Goodness.
Jonathan.
Not a one.
Not a one.
Sorry.
And as Conan O'Brien says, pause for edit. And there, the question doesn't exist anymore.
Wait. Just real quick, when does she get the call from Scolari? Is that kind of like in one of the early chapters where she's investigating a break-in at something?
It's the news of Henry having found the explosion at the wasteland, where they have all the old stuff, and she's
Yes.
finally getting informed of all that. I mean, honestly, it could have just been a one-off, like there's a bunch of agents and we need a bunch of fun names for them.
That
Well,
sounds reasonable.
Or was there a version of the book where there were no Faustus units? Maybe this
I
is a
think
great
there
opportunity.
was, maybe. I think honestly that as the book gained complexity, it does feel to me like the Faustus units were not in the first draft.
Interesting.
Jonathan's probably like reading these editions going like, what the hell is like what? Like what is this about?
This is a great opportunity for us to just straight up ask you if you have any memories or thoughts on the development of those characters, the Faustus units, because in our revisit of this, we got so much joy out of that group of characters, and not just their interactions, but the physical comedy of it, the visual descriptions of them as this en masse sort of single hive mind consciousness. Do you have any memories of the development of the Faustus concept in general?
No. No. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, this is
big
good.
deal.
Oh no, we got to feel for the edges of the map here. That's the
Yeah.
whole. I mean, it's been
That's
10
great.
years. It's the fact that you've told us 42 minutes of anything at this point, 10 years later, is pretty remarkable.
So I want to say something. Just Jeff's brain for all of these like cool additions and the nuances of things, and his mind for like going back to the all the historical aspects of nerddom and fanboy stuff and science and the arts. Like his mind is amazing, and they're as difficult as it could be at points to try to make the work come together and not sort of be broken or whatever. We were doing that work and it was coming together pretty solidly at a point, and it did feel much better to me in the second draft than it did in my first draft from that collaborative work that we were doing. And so I just want to put that out there, like to honor Jeff and his contributions, because if I think we had a hand on the editorial tiller that was a little more firm and it set boundaries, I think we could have probably made a book that we could both have read with affection at this point. Like we would be able to answer some of these questions maybe more accurately, because we wouldn't have just sort of like set it aside and been like, oh, it's got repeated paragraphs because the editorial didn't catch that and this and that and the other. Also, nobody wanted to be the person to say to the grieving husband, like, I think you need to stop at a certain point. I think you need to
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
they just editorial just didn't leave themselves enough time
Yeah.
to do the proper
Absolutely.
work, really. So
That is very fair. Yeah, I mean, like, and I think that, like, yeah, I mean, when we talk about these things now, I mean, like, well, like a huge regret that we had is that at a certain point, yeah, we just needed to stop so that we can allow time to like really proof the thing. Because that's the kind of stuff that like I know that drives Jonathan and I crazy. But because of what how the process the form that it took, we just ran out of time for a really good copy edit and to make it as clean, as artful as as we would love it to be.
To wrap up our editorial conversation here, there is one big change that came pretty late in the game that I must assume you're going to have some twinkling memory of, which is there is the the villain who is above Rotwang, who changed foundationally between basically the advanced reader copy and the final version. So this is draft 3 into final draft, essentially. There was a character named Bowfinger who was another scientist like Rotwang.
Yeah.
And so basically it went from scientist ruling over a scientist, perverse ideas, I want to live forever, still perverse ideas, I want to live forever, but in giving them kind of a differentiator, this new character, Loman, this reimagination, is now a warrior, is now a military mind rather than a scientist. Do you have any memory of the decision to finesse that particular character?
This is probably a me question, right, Jonathan? Like,
it is. That was the point at which I was off the deck, because I at a certain point we had passed deadline, and I was like, I need to stop the back and forth and just let Jeff do what he's gonna do. And yeah, I think that character change and whatever came of that.
yeah. And so if I'm not, this is another example of something that I'm not super connected to, but I do have a vague sense of it where I think that what my thinking was at the time, and I'm sorry that I can't be authoritative about this, was that I think that I was ultimately, I didn't like essentially the duplication of similar kinds of characters, like two scientists, right? I think I wanted ultimately that Bowfinger character to be like qualitatively and thematically different, and and that suddenly That's probably something that I went to bed one night and had an epiphany about, and then woke up the next morning hyper caffeinated on coffee and like, yeah, let's do it. Let's completely eliminate a character and rewrite him as someone completely different. This will work out great. I want to say about that change, isn't it possible that there might be some errors in the book where some vestiges of Bowfinger remain, but were not caught and not deleted? But I forget.
I wouldn't say there really is, to be perfectly honest.
If they were unnoticeable to two dudes who did 7 episodes on it just now. Now that being said, we were flipping between drafts throughout this and had some of our own revelations about the fact that we read the advanced reader copy first back in 2015 and then went and read the final, and some of my own little headcanons about the characters coming back to it 10 years later, I'm realizing, oh crap, that was in the advanced reader copy. I've been like parroting my thoughts on this for 10 years, realizing they weren't in the final version of the book. Chief among
Oh,
them
interesting.
is my embarrassing level of shipping Tesla and Earhart as a couple, which is very much a thing. It is very clearly a thing in the advanced reader copy. And then I think there was just a small edit where it's like, perhaps we make it more paternal to make it mirror the Lee and Claire relationship rather than be this sort of quasi-romantic thing, which is honestly the good call. We are toggling between drafts and look, it's all Tomorrowland. It's just in another pocket universe. We can have every version of these characters that we want. Unless you guys have any other memories of that sort of period of receiving feedback and finalizing the book, I would kind of like to hear if you have any memories about the release and like some of the signings you guys did or the book coming out into the world. Did anything stick with you these 10 years later?
Donuts.
What?
Eating the top pot donuts and staying at your parents' house.
There we
So
go.
I had been drawing Jeff's parents' home into graphic novel form and drawing his parents and not really knowing them. I don't think I ever met your parents before finishing the book, Green River Killer. And so I went up to stay with the family, with Jeff, and to do a signing in Seattle. And we went and got donuts at this place that's kind of local legend in Seattle. And I just remember a positive connection after what felt like a very hard season.
Yeah,
It was really
yeah.
good to reconnect up there.
That's my memory of it too. Like that, just it was a really sweet time hanging out with Jonathan. We had some readings in the Portland area at a school, and these little kids kind of were really like a really great enthusiastic audience for and very curious about like the whole thing. And then Jonathan and I went up to Seattle and we did a little presentation at the university bookstore, and some old high school friends of mine showed up, and
Oh
that was
wow.
kinda
Oh, that's great.
sweet. And then we did a signing at Disneyland,
Oh, that's right. That
Woo!
was such a good
and
thing.
and 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 you guys came, right?
Nick was there. I was out of town on a work trip, but Nick was there.
Yes.
The two of you were very kind to not just sign the book and do a little doodle for me, but you did write "Stop plus Ultra" on there in very kind observation of the dumb shenanigans that Hastin and I were getting into around the release of the film. A treasured object for us for sure, to kind of cap off that whole period. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
how fun! I mean, signing at Disneyland, that's bucket list stuff right there.
That was a fun moment. I like how Jonathan put it. I mean, it had been a tough season of life, tough thing to work on. Being able to connect with him and in the little venues that we had to stand for the work out there. That was sweet, and it was really. It's always been it touches me greatly that you guys like care so much about this project, whether it's this podcast or the shenanigans that you were doing back in the day. It meant a lot that to us that your level of care about it, and it continues to be so. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I hope that this book club stands as kind of a testament to specifically guiding people towards this book, because I can easily say, getting out of the weeds of all the copy edits, and maybe it's not the the final version of this book you guys put out is absolutely,
It's
having
wonderful.
read the draft, it was, there was this absolute incremental, every edit that we observed you guys make, we're like, we see exactly why they made it. It is a better decision here. And just there is an absolute harmony to all of the different elements, the characters and the way they mirror themselves, the deepening of each relationship. You really, by that final draft, you really got into the characters' heads, and even someone, a villain like Henry, being able to see the world through his perspective and really just kind of the tragedy of it hit a lot harder now than I think we even realized, as someone, basically mining for lore nuggets about Plus Ultra, finally being able to look at the characters and what they represent. It's a really solid group of characters that represent this theme, and in that sense, the double act of this book and this movie, they really are speaking the same language in ways that we didn't even realize back then, in thematic ways, not just the details, the themes of these two things and the groups of characters. Having the two leads of this, Lee and Clara, be the opposite of Frank Walker and Casey, where you have the elder gruff, but in the book, the elder one is the optimist. The Clara
Right,
is
right,
the
right, right.
dreamer. You've got
Yeah.
these in, we found these throughout the entire thing, some of which I'm sure were not intentional, some of which were absolutely intentional. But it's been a real joy, and I'm glad to say, I have, I'm not making this up, I've had two people come up to me at events that were not Tomorrowland related and say, I saw you're doing the book club, you just sold a copy. And so, like, we're still, we're like unrelated people, we're still having people come up and say, I'm so glad that you've reminded us that this book is out there and it's something that's rich to be interpreted. And in that sense, because today, when this goes out into the world, today is the 10th anniversary of the film coming out. I was wondering if you guys have any thoughts on the legacy of both the film and the book. Now that you have 10 years of looking back on it, what is the feeling that stays with you after a decade of Tomorrowland, both in book form and in film form?
Like, Tomorrowland is just a very special and complicated thing that, for me, that ultimately I just only have gratitude for. It is what it is. I'm proud of the themes that it stood for and everything it was trying to do. And I also have a relationship with both of the things of both the book and the Tomorrowland of like, if only, and that kind of thing. So it's just it's a complicated question. Tomorrowland is ultimately just a very, very personal thing for me. And it's a good thing for me to reflect on because of what it stands for and which is that that there's a hardness to life and dreams are going to get dashed and tough things are going to come our way but how do we learn from it, how do we grow from it, how do we grieve it, how do we move forward, live out the principles and ideals that we believe in a world where that's kind of very difficult to do. And in many ways, Tomorrowland is a very is a living monument to that. That things are not always going to turn out the way that you want, but it offers some kind of message for hope and how to move forward. So anyway, it's so complicated to me that I actually don't even know how to talk about it.
Amen.
For me, it's like I suffered that whole period of time in which this book came out and which the movie came out, which the arc happened. What you just said 100% rings true to me. I lost both my parents during that summer period and then right around when the book came out and whatever else. And so
Mm.
it is just phenomenal how much, weirdly amongst these people that are together recording this little podcast, like how much interesting, loss and life and lessons are here as part of this, and bringing, me and Nick together was
That's true.
amazing.
We did not know each other.
I mean,
That's cool.
it's really just one of those things for me that it's like that that hardness and kind of revisiting the book 10 years later and seeing it and like really being able to process it a lot more and whatever else. It's yeah, it's just one of those things where, it speaks so closer to home for me given what was going on at that time period. And I just, I still feel so sorry for you, Jeff, that you had to go through that too.
Mm. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
To both of you, to Jonathan and Jeff, for sharing your stories here. It's been a real honor to have you guys look back on this. And Jonathan, I'm curious for you, your legacy looking back on this Tomorrowland endeavor. How has this last decade changed the perspective on that other world?
Well, I think just with time, healing the wounds of the relational difficulties and the sort of the egos that were at work and the professional ambitions and all of that stuff that was sort of in the mix. The thing that I ultimately come away with is I just love Jeff, and
Yeah.
I I loved many different moments of being able to work on that project. I remember just, when you're writing, sometimes you have the feeling of flight when you are writing
Yeah.
something that feels like it's going well. I think Aaron Sorkin talks about that too. A number of people do. You just like, it's like you've experienced liftoff. And I experienced that a few times with the book on, those summer days working in my too hot of an office with a new baby crying and but feeling like there was some good work done that day. And it sort of planted a seed in me to write more prose, which I haven't quite realized yet. I've done more graphic novels, but there's the potential for this next book that I'm working on to end up being a prose book with illustrations, sort of like this one. So yeah, those are
Yeah.
some little snippets, I guess.
If I could jump on that, like what Jonathan said, I mean, like, yeah, when I think about this, when I think about Tomorrowland, uh, I think about relationships. And so I think about Jonathan and I think about what we went through on this, and that we're here today and able to talk about this. And I just, I adore Jonathan and everything he stands for. And that's what I think about that. Even as hard as it was, part of that story is also us working through it and repairing and caring about each other moving forward. And similarly, my friendship with Damon on the movie side and other people that I met, I love hearing about you guys forming a friendship as a result of Tomorrowland. These are ultimately small things. It's not a movie that set the world on fire, but it also deeply affected in ultimately, I would say, positive ways, the people that care about it. So, I love hearing about that.
Yeah, thank you guys. That's a beautiful bow on this. Bet we're not going to let you go. We have a few more minutes with you in which I would like Hastin to do some rapid fire pedantic questions that we amassed throughout our thing. But first, in case those go into the realm of we don't remember anything, I would like to give both of you the opportunity here. Is there anything that you're working on that you'd like to direct the audience's attention to, non-Tomorrowland related? Jonathan, I think there's some kind of monster camp coming up. Am I right about this?
Yeah, I helped to run a little arts nonprofit here in Silverton, Oregon. Kind of took it out of the doldrums of COVID and what happened to so many arts centers at that time when they had to almost close. So we didn't close, and so I'm trying to, with the help of a number of people, reopen this little part of it, which is a children's arts education center. And we want to have an after school arts program and a summer art camp that's sort of modeled after the Jim Henson Creature Workshop, where kids get to build puppets and creatures and make comics and illustrations, and we'll sort of assemble it all into this multimedia world. And so that's something that, yeah, I have coming up, and we still have some spots left. If you're an Oregon family and you live in Salem or Silverton or around there, yeah, that's coming up. And then I'm working on books, but stuff that won't be out for a long time. So
All right. Well, we wait with bated breath. Jeff, do you want to tease the audience, or is it all very, very secret?
Oh, it's all very, very secret. But I recently wrote a short story for the Oni comic, Epitaphs from the Abyss. They're kind of like a new line of EC related horror and sci-fi titles. And I wrote a short story, and so I recently went through a cancer experience where I had colon cancer and I had chemo and everything is good here, but I learned a lot about myself during that experience, and one of them was my unhealthy relationship to cheeseburgers. So I wrote a short story about that. so
I wonder that.
and then I'm working on some things, and yeah, like in development that I'd probably get fired if I said anything about. So yeah.
Say nothing. But now that ushers us into the portion of the podcast where you both regret agreeing to do this.
Okay, we're going to start with a lightning round of pedantic questions asked in previous book club episodes. So, our last 7 episodes, we had a ton of questions that we came out with. And here they are in no particular order. Number 1, was Henry and Clara's surname Stevens an homage to Dave Stevens?
Maybe.
No, do not expound. We gotta go move on. Hastin, next question.
Okay, next question. Obviously, the comic, we love it. It's amazing, but it includes the book, and the comic book includes a cipher. Did you feel like you had to put that cipher in because we were doing these non-approved, ARG shenanigans at the time?
Did you feel bullied into including the puzzle at the end of the comic book?
No.
Good. No, I can sleep now. I've been carrying the guilt of this for 10 years. Thank God.
Next up, this one's actually a little bit more serious. The idea of the Otherworld naming contest was not present in those first couple drafts of the book. So can you walk us a little bit through how you came up with the concept of Graceland for Clara's pitch?
We'd spent a lot of time chewing over this word Graceland. Does that word bring up anything in your mind about this?
No, but what I would probably say is I don't think that there was any kind of like lore related inspiration for that name. I'm pretty sure that was probably just very personally uh rooted in very personal kind of like notions of grace and what that word might mean to us. But I can't really speak to the origins, but that sounds like something that would very much come from spiritual, heartfelt, personal places.
All right, Tastin, any more deeply emotional rapid fire questions that Jeff has to answer very quickly?
No, I'd like to switch over to Jonathan now. Jonathan, are there any characters, props, locations, moments from the books that were not depicted in the illustrations that we got that you really would have liked to illustrate, but there just wasn't room for, or it didn't match up, or anything else?
Oh, I mean, gosh, that I've always really loved that scene that you guys were referencing in Duquesne's like New York digs. I think it would have been really fun to draw like something from that for sure.
And all Duquesne's women.
Exactly. Yeah, they're fabulous outfits, and yeah,
That's hilarious.
that would have been fun. How Disney let us do any of this for like a middle grade book? I'll
No,
never.
and then Hastin and I learning that was a real guy. Like that was another moment of research on the podcast
Oh,
where we're
that's
like,
right.
wait a minute, this guy existed. Maybe this isn't necessarily rapid fire. Maybe this gets into the realm of headcanon or no, we call them the no prizes, right? In the comics world. So okay, I'm gonna do this one real quick. In the movie, George Clooney says, "We're in the Eiffel Tower. It's an antenna. Tesla designed the antenna." In the comic book, beautifully, it says Plus Ultra was formed at a meeting at the World's Fair in the Eiffel Tower. So, headcanon wise, do you think Eiffel and Tesla had a pre Plus Ultra collaboration, or did he like retrofit antenna gack onto the innards of the Eiffel Tower?
The former.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't speak authoritatively to intentions 10 years ago or 11 years ago, but I think that I can say pretty confidently what we would like people to believe is that the Eiffel Tower was a product of long lead, long term plus ultra thinking. So I'm not sure I like the idea that perhaps it was built and then it was retrofitted with like what plus ultra needed it to be. That doesn't sound to me like how I approach the world building there. I think it's more like there was a plan cooked up by the early proto collaborators of the modern form of Plus Ultra. And I think that we talked about at some point in our world building, and I don't know if we flick at it at all in the book, is that there might be like a 17th century version of like Plus Ultra, and that like it kind of gets dormant, and the legend kind of like ends up like reaching people in different eras, and then they kind of take it up. I'm pretty sure that our idea was that the Tower was a product of Plus Ultra thinking, and came with it all of the stuff that they always wanted it to have.
Beautiful. Thank you for making me not regret a very stupid question. That was a very good answer.
That was great.
That was great. So, one last one for Jonathan before we wrap up. There was an editor's note in that second draft of the book that was basically that the full comic was going to be in the middle of the book. Basically, when Lee gets the comic and looks through it, the audience gets to it's right.
Right.
It interrupts the prose. Do you guys remember like the placement of the comic and when that was decided to be at the end of the book instead?
Jonathan, do you know?
I don't, but I would assume it was placed at the end, probably more for book production money reasons than for anything else, but I'm not sure.
I feel like I was pretty disappointed by that. The direct inspiration for that, I think the timeline of this works out great. Is Were you guys fans of Alan Moore's The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen?
Well, I know I am.
In the book, The Black Dossier, there's a part where Mina Murray is like reading through the narrative of the comic. There comes to a point where she actually reads a book, and then we actually read the book with her, and then she shuts it at the end of it. And like, once we get to this, it's like basically an insert in the middle of this graphic novel that you read. And then when we're done, she's done reading it. She's like, well, that was something, or something like that, and all of that. And like, I think that was like, it was like, oh, we got to do that. Like that sounds fun. And like the ideal version that, I don't know how that could have been different, but yeah, it's probably a production thing. It might have been a timing thing. That might have been a victim of like, of like being kind of behind a little bit. But yeah, ideally that comic would have fallen exactly in the book where it gets read.
Well, and then they made the great decision to release it as a free digital comic for people before the movie. So it existed on its own as well. It wasn't just tacked on at the end of the print version. There was this, they renamed it The Secrets of Tomorrowland, and they put it out for everyone to enjoy on their own, which was great. Well, thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you guys in 10 years.
Awesome.
Sounds
Look
good.
forward to it.
I hear sometimes the memories come back even further in. You start to remember the earlier years. So that's when we'll tap you for those.
I look forward to what we remember 10 years from now. Yeah.
And we'll be talking about a legacy sequel directed by someone who hasn't been born yet.
Oh my gosh.
Or maybe
Yeah.
it'll be directed by the AI version of Francis Ford Coppola.
Well, there we go.
Beautiful.
You know.